A terrifying date is approaching for all Russian ultra-patriots and die-hard Putinists. On January 12, 2026, the so-called special military operation will match the duration of the Great Patriotic War. Propagandists are dreading this moment, because shameful comparisons are inevitable. Back then, in 4 years, they defeated fascism and took Berlin. And now they've defeated common sense and taken Kupiansk on credit.
In a few weeks, the duration of the war will equal that of the Great Patriotic War. When people ask, why haven't we achieved the same result? It's because not the whole country is at war. The top brass are fighting. The government is fighting. The administration and the president are fighting. The governors are fighting. But further down the line, what are you trying to ruin people's mood? It's New Year's for us. The trouble isn't at the front, the trouble is in the rear. And something needs to be done about it.
Naturally, it's all the fault of the Russian population who are fighting and dying poorly. But Putin is doing great. He alone, with a group of heroic bureaucrats, is advancing against all of NATO.
It's nonsense. Nonsense.
But no matter how hard the propaganda tries to distract from the approaching date and shift the focus, everyone understands everything. A special operation lasting as long as the Great Patriotic War is a disgrace that can never be washed away. Putin's regime is built on and sustained by a culture of victory mania. This is the main ideology of the Russian Reich. It was precisely with Putin's rise to power that Victory Day turned into total trash. The entire modern Russian myth is built on the victory in the Great Patriotic War. All these mental cliches about Grandpa's overcoat, Katyusha, the T-34, soldier's porridge, and we can do it again. For 25 years, Russians have been told that they are the greatest and most unique people because 80 years ago, 27 million died in the war. But at least they took Berlin. And now comes a sobering reality, because in all that time, the descendants of the victors can't even take a single region in its entirety. They've been storming Pokrovsk for 4 years.
We all appealed to the memory of the Great Patriotic War. It turns out that we weren't able to do what they did, what our ancestors, who were actually very close to us, managed to accomplish.
The only thing Russia has managed to repeat is a treacherous attack without declaring war, bombing Kyiv at 4 a.m., and losses comparable in scale to World War II.
1.5 million. A number that truly deserves a very significant big question mark indeed.
I assert, in other words, my opinion is that there are over 1 million victims, killed, missing, and wounded, including those who died in hospitals.
For 25 years, people in the swamps took pride in victory and covered themselves in St. George ribbons. And now they watch as the Supreme Commander-in-Chief appears dressed like a Piotr security guard. With the Chief of the General Staff, they discuss the heroic capture of a village with just 3 houses, for which more Russian soldiers died than the population of that village.
The war has dragged on, well, you could say, for 4 years now, maybe even longer. Call it what you want, but you can't call this a victory, let alone a convincing one. Victory Parade in Odessa gained control of the Black Sea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, unblocked Transnistria, and so on. How many times have we talked about this? But this will not be achieved, as you understand. Why the hell?
That's because... Well, because...
Grandfathers crossed half of Europe in 4 years. And the crazed grandkids, after 4 years of the special military operation, are complaining to the US president that Ukrainians are bombing Putin's residence. The world has never seen conquerors and informers like these. in
during the late hours of the night, specifically from December 28th into the early morning of the 29th in the year 2025. The Kiev regime deliberately carried out a significant and unprovoked terrorist attack, employing a substantial number of 91 strike unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones, in this aggressive act. Long-range drones targeted the state residence of the President of the Russian Federation in the Novgorod region. All unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed by air defense systems.
So now, how are Russians supposed to sit in their kitchens with Lyubi blaring in the background, knocking back a shot for victory and feeling proud of their greatness? After all, they've been told that they were the only ones who won the war.
Regarding our ongoing relationship with Ukraine, I must respectfully disagree with your previous statement when you just asserted that if we had been completely separated, we most certainly would not have achieved victory in the war. We would have won anyway.
In the minds of Russians, the stereotype has firmly taken root that Putin personally defeated Hitler. He and his political strategists have blurred all the lines of history and claimed this victory for himself alone. For Russians, May 9th is associated specifically with him, not with the victory itself. That's why the protracted special military operation is his personal disgrace as a dictator. Back then, over 1,418 days, the Soviet people saved the entire world from the Brown Plague and extinction. They liberated dozens of nations from oppression and divided the world into spheres of influence. And now their descendants, under the leadership of the bold one, a Stalin substitute, can't defeat Ukraine. Just one. Even with the help of another nuclear power, North Korea, and with China's support. Just think about that, Russians, and live with it.
The war has given meaning back to my generation. It has restored our pride, a sense of understanding, of self-awareness.
Yes, you're a freak, a real asshole. How can they now tell the swamp-dwelling population about their greatness if for 4 years they haven't been able to deal with Ukraine, a country that for 10 years their propaganda described as not a real state, an artificial entity, the poorest and most technologically backward, with a weak government, a weak army, and an invented people who speak an invented language? In
a hot war will defeat Ukraine in 2 days. Why even bother defeating them, for God's sake? It's just Ukraine. We'll suppress those firing points. This is what we discussed during the commercial break.
They tried to raise an eyebrow but ended up tearing their rubber ass. And the Kremlin dug this pit of shame for itself. For 10 years, propaganda called Ukrainians fascists and Nazis. In other words, they drew a direct parallel with the Great Patriotic War. They planned to capture Kyiv in 3 days and raise the victory banner over the Verkhovna Rada, just like in the movies. And Putin would officially become the leader who defeated fascism, like Stalin. Most Russians also gladly supported the monstrous aggression against Ukraine, because they too dreamed of the glory of their grandfathers. Their television would have told them that they too had defeated the fascists. And the victory mania would have doubled. On paper, the plan was perfect. In reality, it's hard to imagine a story more foolish and vile.
One of the most insanely idiotic things I've ever heard.
If Russia had managed to defeat Ukraine in a week or a month, the information wave would have quickly been swept under the rug. The real facts about the start of the aggression and evidence of war crimes. In the West, they would have mumbled some concerns and continued trading with the ghouls. Just like it happened with Georgia in 2008. But the Ukrainians punched the occupiers right in their arrogant, stupid faces, and the whole world saw the true face of the so-called descendants of the victors over fascism. They themselves have become fascists. The Russian army eagerly picked up the Nazi banner and took their historical place. The whole world sees Russia as the aggressor. Moreover, the Russians themselves understand this perfectly well. It is Russia that is the occupier, waging a war of conquest. Russians are fighting like the Germans did. They bomb peaceful cities, execute civilians, burn books, and persecute people based on their nationality.
We stopped at a gas station before the city, before Berlyansk. Good evening, please tap your card. I say, why are you speaking to me in Ukrainian? The girl is standing there. I say, why are you speaking to me in Ukrainian? She stays silent. I ask again, why are you speaking to me in Ukrainian? Because I want to. Well, you want to. You want to? Fine, that's it. To the nearest checkpoint. They sent her to the ADMKR, to the basement. The basement, let's go relax. Let's go relax in the basement.
The Russian army burns entire cities and villages to the ground as it advances, leaving only chimneys behind, just like the Nazis did during the Great Patriotic War. Even the most die-hard patriots admit this. All the way
to the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. You drive through these villages and they're completely destroyed. There are only chimney stacks left standing, like, I don't know, the memorial in Belarus, Katyn chimney stacks, a cemetery of dead villages. That's the state these settlements are in. And
Ukraine is actually standing up to fascism and heroically defending its land. Yes, the Ukrainians are retreating. But the USSR also retreated at first, until at some point the enemy faltered. The same will happen now. Russia won't be able to fight like this for long. Russia will simply run out of people. Everyone thinks about the economy, money, resources, equipment, but it's people who will run out first. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, take me to the war. I want to take revenge for Russia. Moscow is fighting with mercenaries. Russians aren't going to defend their homeland. They're going to make money so they can pay off their loans and renovate their kitchens. But the number of mercenaries isn't unlimited. How many more people in Russia are willing to die for cash and a Lada Priora? 1 million have already been lost at the front. At most, there's another 1 million drunks crawling under fences, dreaming of raising the flag over the Reichstag. Or at least raising the flag over the ruins of some village in Donbass. And then dying right there. Of course, propaganda is trying to encourage people to join the army. Like, rise up, vast country, for a mortal fight. The special military operation is already being called the New Patriotic War. But patriotic wars aren't fought with mercenaries. It's a contradiction in terms. No one fights for their homeland for money. That's an invention of the Putin regime. The only thing in which Russia has outdone the Soviet Union is in its even more inhumane treatment of its own soldiers. Strangely enough, in the Soviet army, soldiers were treated better. Despite the enormous losses, wounded soldiers there were not sent into assaults. And penal battalions were separate units, from which you could be transferred if you were wounded. But the modern Russian army is one big penal battalion, and you can only finish your service either feet first or forward, without your legs.
My husband, tomorrow he would have... Sunday. 6 months? My husband is already gone. It's been 6 months. My husband went off to fight, and 42 people went with him. Ask me, is even one of them alive? No. Not a single one of them is left. My husband held out longer than anyone.
This war cannot end with a truce with the aggressor. Like World War II, it must end with the defeat of the aggressor. Or at the very least, like in the scenario of the First World War, when the aggressor simply could no longer fight and asked for capitulation themselves. At that time, by the way, the Germans were actually on French territory. But that no longer mattered, because the empire had collapsed. The same fate awaits the Russian pseudo-empire. And Ukraine will inevitably win its own patriotic war. I want to remind you that this video was created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form. This is done to create a comedic or dramatic effect. We do not aim to mislead, but simply focus on humor. Please take this with a smile.